It's time now for the Bob Siegel Show, a religious open forum where all questions are welcome. And now, here's your host, Christian apologist, Bob Siegel.
And this is Bob Siegel. So, you'd like to believe in God, but you're thinking that it's inappropriate for churches to be discussing politics. In fact, maybe you're even considering leaving your church because they talk about politics so much. Let me tell you something, my friend. I don't think anybody truly feels that way. And what they usually mean is, I don't think churches should be talking about the kinds of politics I disagree with. I remember a number of years somebody was telling me that they were going to leave the church that I attended. And I do preach at Skyline once in a while. I've never preached on anything political, but it does come up there from the pastor. And she was going to leave because they were talking too much about politics. As I talked to her, it was the positions that were taken by my pastor that she was having an issue with. It always sounds nice and spiritual to say Christians shouldn't discuss politics. That is not the teaching of the New Testament. The New Testament told us to pray for kings that are in high places so that we may live a peaceful life. I've gone through this passage before on this program. That might have been the only kind of political involvement the church was able to do in those days, but wanting to live a peaceful life, which is more conducive for the spreading of the gospel, not persecution, but more conducive, a peaceful life for the spreading of the gospel. There's nothing wrong with that. And if the Apostle Paul could have told that same church, pray for kings in places, and if you have a chance to elect the right king, don't you think he would have told them to do that? Well, I know one person who would have agreed with me on that and agreed with him on that, and that is co-host Mike Fredenburg. Mike, welcome back to our program.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
So we wanted to come on and debrief a little bit from this rousing week that the Republicans had right on the eve of the Democrats doing the same thing. The news changes so much every day. This show is going to be dated tomorrow. Those of you that aren't listening to us live, who download this off my website, we're probably going to be dated already by the time you hear us, but we'll be so entertaining and so thought-provoking. I know you're going to enjoy the show anyway.
So, Bob, yeah, that's I woke up this morning and the first thing I heard in turning on the news shows was that Debbie Wasserman Schultz would not even be running the Democrat National Convention, and that's pretty shocking. So basically, the Reince Priebus of the DNC will not be running the convention.
Well, I don't know what took them so long. She is such a blithering idiot when she talks. I mean, this is not the first scandal that Wasserman Schultz has been involved with, but I wish they'd keep her because it's only good for the Republicans.
Sure, she's losing her probably helps them, but it does put a pall over their convention, and contrary to what all the left stream media was thinking was going to be the case, the Republican convention was really pretty tame. Ted Cruz notwithstanding. But even then, I think a lot of the people that were booing him off the stage were even former Cruz delegates. I think even his own delegates turned. Even the little on-the-floor demonstration was relatively minor. It was over so quickly, and it was just nothing but sour grapes. So, the Republican convention, which was supposed to be a disaster, actually was not, and actually, I think, did a pretty good job of positioning Trump going into the final cycle here. And the Democrat convention, there's already much more protests happening right now, even right now, just listening to the news, than happened during the Republican convention.
Well, ever since Obama won re-election in 2012, I've prayed almost every day that he would just implode. And maybe that's starting to happen somewhat belatedly. I mean, ever since that time, one scandal after another has come up. But, I think Obama's and the Clintons, they benefit, ironically, from a multiplicity of scandals because there's so many of them. People grow numb to it, and they start thinking, there's no way one person or two people could be responsible for all these things. Must be a Republican conspiracy. Whereas you have one juicy scandal like Nixon and Watergate, and that one really takes.
Yeah, and then, of course, you do have the unequal treatment of the political parties by the media.
Exactly.
So a scandal that would destroy a Republican, other than Donald Trump, let's say, will be slept off and ignored by the left stream media.
So what's Trump's secret? He seems to be immune to this. He keeps putting his foot in his mouth. He says things I wouldn't want him to say. But the last time you were on our program, we talked about the fact that maybe they should just get out of the way and let him be himself. He seems to know what he's doing, too. So kind of seeing both sides of this.
Yeah, I see both sides of this. I think he knows a lot more of what he's doing than a lot of people give him credit for. But I can't quite go all the way over and think that everything he's done.
There is a vengeful streak. This thing about how he's going to go after Cruz now and fund one of the CPACs. Is that what he's going to do?
Yeah, he's planning it maybe possibly a super PAC.
Super PAC, yeah.
Like Ted Cruz and, Kasich. But the thing is, their elections are to 2018. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a throwaway line today. He got some media in it. People will talk about it a little bit. It unfortunately takes a little bit away from the self-destruction happening with the Democrat National Convention.
Yes. Speaking of Kasich, I was a lot more angry with him than Cruz. I mean, this convention was in his home state, and he had decided that he was going to renege on his pledge a long time ago. I remember when he was being interviewed on the show Morning with Maria on Fox Business Channel, and she said, if Trump gets the nomination, will you support him, as you pledged to do? He says, Maria, the RNC is not going to nominate Donald Trump. She says, well, that wasn't my question, sir. If they nominate, because not going to happen, Maria. He would not answer the question. And so I'm not surprised by any of this.
And it's interesting. You could make a case for Senator Cruz.
Well, the guy went after his wife,
right?
Calling his father, suggesting that his father was in on the John Kennedy.
That was to me. That was a tempest in a teapot. I mean, Trump does these throwaway things there. He never said...
And then he admits later that he didn't really mean it, that it was just a political strategy. He'll actually admit that.
Well, yeah, but he didn't. He never said his dad was part of the assassination
wasn't he
plot.
Quoting from
it was
the Inquirer?
It was a picture of Ted Cruz's dad. It was his dad sitting with
what was his name? Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, Harvey Oswald. And his dad was briefly part of an organization that he repudiated and left because he found out that it was not his kind of organization. So but regardless, he does have a tendency to, be very unconventional. He's done so many things that would have destroyed other politicians that I've reached the point just thinking that he sort of has inoculated himself against himself.
Probably. And I don't think Cruz needed to get up and give a phony, enthusiastic endorsement. He could have gotten up and said, I'll be honest with you, I still have some trouble with some of the things Donald Trump said about my family. However, we can't elect Hillary Clinton. We've got to pay attention to who the next Supreme Court justices are going to be. And therefore, I'm going to urge you to go out and vote for Donald Trump. That would have sounded genuine. I think he could have held on to his own integrity and done that. But to go and give a speech and then as if he's ignoring the big elephant in the room, I mean, they literally booed him off that stage.
No, I think it was a big mistake. I think he, in his mind, was thinking he was, positioning himself for 2020.
He was assuming that Trump was going to lose.
Yeah, and positioning himself for 2020, kind of like, Reagan gave the speech of his life in 1976, that really helped make him the prohibitive favorite for 1980, and I think that's what Ted Cruz thought he was doing. But let's go back to Kasich for a second. Now, Kasich, Ted Cruz, you could make a case for. Now, he sort of undercut it by showing up at the convention, his own case. He sort of undercut his own argument by being willing to show up there, because if he really was so upset by Donald Trump, then he wouldn't have shown up there.
And if he really believes in putting the country first, then he'd rise above this too. I'm sorry. Now I believe Ted Cruz cares more about his own political future than about America. And I'm saying this as one who came on this radio show many times saying that I support Cruz over Trump.
He does seem to be very politically ambitious, very calculating. And when you look at it and you look back at some of his past actions, which really actually seemed very noble. And it was very encouraging because we were very frustrated by the Republican Congress doing nothing. And he was one of those people, the lone voice there standing up. But in the end, he really didn't get anything done. And he did seem to be ready to leverage that to run for the presidency.
Yeah. Well, do you think he's ended his political career, Ted Cruz?
I don't think he's necessarily ended his political career, but I just really do not see him as a viable presidential candidate. I had actually reached that conclusion before the end of this whole primary season, because so many of my friends, Christian conservative friends, just could not sync up with Ted Cruz.
I know. I kept hearing people say that he was unlikable. I honestly never found him all that unlikable. However, based on what he did last week, now I do find him unlikable. That's the irony.
And I won't say, but I mean, it was amazing just how people that I was very surprised at just thought of him as being a slick politician, not being really very ethical in how he conducted his campaign. And these are Christian conservatives. And I was very surprised to hear that, sort of out of the blue, my sister, she won't mind saying this. I mean, I asked her about Ted Cruz and she just had such a negative impression of him. I was shocked.
Yeah.
And I was listening to him and I was very much into Ted Cruz for a period of time because he is so smart. He's so articulate. He thinks on his feet. He has a lot of great tools and talents, but I just don't think he has great people skills. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so, but Kasich, whereas Ted Cruz was attacked, Kasich was given a free ride by Donald Trump all the way through.
And Kasich kept positioning himself as the nice guy candidate, the guy that's above the fray, the guy that won't get down in the mud. And I thought he got down in the mud pretty much this week, though, by refusing to come to his own convention in his own city.
But he was the one that was not attacked by Trump. Jeb Bush was thrashed by Trump. Marco Rubio was thrashed by Trump. Ted Cruz was thrashed by Trump. Kasich got a free ride.
I'll tell you what,
anybody that should have honored their pledge, that cannot point to an excuse to not honor their pledge, it's
Kasich.
Governor Kasich.
I know, and the guy was just delusional. When he won the primary, his one primary in Ohio, he gave an acceptance speech as if he had won the presidency. I mean, he was thanking his mother, for Pete's sake. I'm going, you realize you just won one primary, sir?
Well, we're rehashing sort of the primary here, but we have plenty to talk about going forward. And I'm actually, cautiously optimistic about Mr. Trump's chances.
Okay, well, we will discuss that cautious optimism when we return to the Bob Siegel Show. Welcome back to 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Bob Siegel, co-hosting this week, Mike Fredenburg.
Thank you, Bob. So as we're heading into the final stretch here, we've got a ways to go, but if you just look at all the turmoil in the world, the rise of terrorism, the rise of Islamism, the economy, the fact that, that the lower middle class and the middle class are actually running 18 to 20% below where they were 20 years ago in terms of their income. And all the factors that have propelled Trump to the nomination, all these factors seem to be, set to push him forward into the general election.
It's his to lose.
And it's his to lose.
He can screw it up.
And of course he's riding the wave of a movement, which is there. It was there ready to be for somebody to tap it. But he has, let's give him credit, he has had the guts to say a lot of things most politicians have been afraid to say.
Well, I just love the very fact that he's not politically correct and he'll speak his mind. And even when he thinks out loud and hasn't completely threshed out an issue, at least the guy's trying to think for himself instead of repeating these idiotic talking points.
Now, and he does talk like a normal person. Even you and I, who both, we write and we debate all the time, and we want to be effective when we debate. We basically are very careful about our language, or sometimes it may not seem like we're on the show here, but we are. We try to be careful about our language. We want to be effective. We don't want to unnecessarily offend people. I know when I write, I'll do a first draft and I'll say, why am I saying it this way? And I'll back off and I'll try to think of a way to be more tactful.
I even have a reoccurring character on the show called Disclaimer Dan who comes on.
Yeah. So, and we do that. Now, Trump just gets out there and he says what the average person thinks. When he made his Muslim comment, we have a problem with Muslims. Everybody is shocked.
Which he is starting to walk back now.
No, but he's not really necessarily walking back. What he was saying,
you could say he's refining.
He did say a temporary ban on Muslims coming to the country, and
now he's saying, it just depends on the territory.
Right, it depends if there's terrorism and things like that. However, the thing that he did say though that was interesting is it was actually more accurate than what we had been talking about in the public, which is this idea of this teeny, teeny, titsy, get a magnifying glass out, and if you look really hard, or maybe at a microscope, you might find that one Muslim out of a billion there that's thinking about terrorism.
Yeah, instead of just saying, look, we know a bunch of them are coming from Syria. We know that ISIS said they're going to plant a bunch of them as refugees.
And so Trump brought into the discussion, we would not be talking about Sharia law. I don't believe we'd be talking about Sharia law and some of the nuances and some of the big issues if Trump had not brought the issue forward.
Yeah, I don't think the wusses like Jeb Bush would have been bringing this stuff up.
No, they wouldn't have. And
they would have been surrounded by people telling them to be careful. And we need to have the conversation.
Of course, the vast majority of Muslims will never participate in violence. However, we do have a strong history. If you look throughout the world and you look at large Muslim populations, there is a correlation between that and prevalence of terrorist
actions.
And
actually, when they do surveys, the vast majority of Muslims do accept Sharia law. Now, they sometimes argue about what Sharia law actually means.
And it depends on the country there, but the bottom line is that there is something that we need to work with the Muslim community in our country and get them to start to cooperate in stopping some of these terrorist activities, because since 9/11, the FBI has noted that there's been very little cooperation from the Muslim community, and we need better cooperation from that community.
Yeah, absolutely we do.
So going back to that, I mean, this morning I woke up to the horrible news of a guy wielding a machete, killing a woman and injuring 2 other people.
Now, where was this?
This is in Germany.
This was another one in Germany?
In Germany, yes, in Germany, and he was a Syrian refugee out there on a terrorist spree. Very interestingly, somebody took the law into their own hands and actually defended themselves. He got run over by a BMW. Only in Germany, right? I mean,
and the shooter at the mall last week, it was, I think, about an hour after Obama gave his speech that Trump's exaggerating things. It's not so bad. You'd think listening to him that the world's falling apart. Then within an hour, we have another one.
So we have a very specific case of a Syrian refugee engaged in reprehensible conduct, horrible, monstrous conduct. And
Hillary's response is to bring in thousands and thousands more.
And this goes into Trump's narrative, which I think is a good narrative. We have to be able to vet the people we bring into our country. Now, we haven't always vetted the people we brought into this country, but that is a different time. We're in a different era. We're in an era with the rising tide of Islam.
Well, we have a movement that has declared war in the United States, that has openly admitted their strategy. And the only reason they're doing that is they know that we're so stupid that they could say it openly and get away with it.
Yes. So I believe Trump clearly is on the right side of this issue. And he's not on the right side of the issue because he looked at a poll. He's on the right side of the issue because that's where he believes he should be. He should be putting America first, is what he believes. We should be doing that. And that's where we are with him, is he wants to put America first. I do really believe that he wants to do that. You could disagree with him about how to best go about that, but it totally makes sense to me. The other countries are trying to put their country first. I don't fault them for that. And
the other countries are allowed to have borders. The other countries are allowed to have their own language. How come we're the only country that's not allowed to follow the same rules as other countries?
So, exactly. So I think it's a very reasonable thing. I want America to be put first. That doesn't mean I don't want to be compassionate. I mean, historically, for the last 100 years or so, I don't know what it is, but America, when there's disasters around the world, both from our government response and private charity, we're the most generous people in the world by far.
In fact, there was a satirical novel written years ago called The Mouse That Roared. I don't know if you ever read it, but it was about a country that wanted to declare war on the United States and lose, because you're never luckier than losing a war with the United States, because we'll go over there and give them all this aid and rebuild their country and fix their economy for them.
Exactly. So, but those are not mutually exclusive things. If you want to be in a position to help other people in the world, if you want to be the bright light on the hill, the shining light, the shining city on the hill, then you need to have your house in order. You need to be strong. And we've been gutting ourselves with bad trade policies and immigration.
And I'm sorry, when people use the Constitution to defend people who by definition would overthrow our Constitution, it does not work. And I think we could say this, like even when the communists want to have a rally, communism would overthrow the American Constitution if they got into power.
Correct.
So there is something very self-contradictory in there to say, well, our Constitution gives them a right to freedom of speech. Well, not if you're going to overturn that freedom of speech. So something's really wrong with the way we're handling things.
Well, I think we could draw a line is if somebody is advocating taking away my freedom of speech, That's where I want to draw the line.
Exactly. And at that point, they don't have a right to freedom of speech.
And that is a basic part of our Constitution. And so if you're in this country now, right now we have a lot of people in our country that are spoiled. They don't understand the blessing that it is to live in our country. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand how remarkable it is. And they don't value it. So, and we're stuck with those people. They're citizens. But right now, in terms of people coming into this country, I want people that come into this country, like Trump said in his speech, that want to be here,
that really want to be here,
that admire our value system, that want to be part of America, and do not want to take away my freedoms. And I don't want, if they don't like that, I don't want them here.
All right. Well, we want you here after the break, though. Then you can come back. I'm joined today by my good friend and co-host and frequent contributor to National Review, Mike Fredenburg.
Well, Bob, as we were talking about Donald Trump, and I really have a hard time understanding, the hardcore opposition to him from people in my own party. No, given the alternative at this point, I mean, we are past the point of the primary, so we have a choice. As I think you said this morning, if you can say that again, we have a choice of two things. Yes. I appreciate that.
Yes, the Laurel and Hardy illustration we've done before, an old Laurel and Hardy movie where the waiter comes and they're ordering dessert, and the choice of desserts is ice cream, vanilla, or pistachio, and Stanley goes, "I'll take chocolate." Ladies and gentlemen, your choice is Trump or Hillary, vanilla or pistachio. You can't have chocolate. That ship has sailed. So now what are you going to do? Based on your choice, what is your conscience telling you to do?
And I just think you have to be extremely, almost paranoid to believe that Trump is lying to such a degree and is untrustworthy to such a degree that he would be anywhere near as bad as Hillary Clinton. I personally believe that Trump will try to do a good job because I like where he stands in a lot of positions. But even if you don't, for example, like Trump on the trade issue, realize that Trump says he's going to do things and he's going to work to get them done. But it's not like he's running his own company.
He still has to work with Congress.
He still has to work with Congress. He's still got the courts. So I think he's going to try to restore some balance and things and work very hard to do that.
If all he does is overturn the Johnson Amendment and appoint one Supreme Court justice, that would be worth it right there, even if he did nothing else, right there.
And he has a chance to appoint between 1 and 3 Supreme Court justices. That is...
Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg says she's going to leave the country if he gets there's a reason to vote for him right there, ladies and gentlemen.
So the Johnson Amendment is whether or not that's realistic, that could be overturned in the political environment, I have no idea.
Well, it could probably be overturned by Congress, but then there'll probably be a lawsuit, and then the courts will probably settle it, which gets back again to the Supreme Court.
It goes back to the courts. Yeah. Now, going back to his choice for vice presidents. I
was going to ask you what you think of Pence.
I really think that Governor Pence is a good choice. I was leaning toward Newt Gingrich strictly on the basis that he still, by far and away, is the most articulate. He's got fresh ideas.
He would have been a more fun one to watch in the debates.
He's fun to listen to, and he is just so sharp. But Pence is no slouch when it comes to public speaking. He has a tremendous conservative background. He is a Christian conservative. He shores up that support there in the party. He was one of the first people to reach out to the Tea Party as a member of Congress to come on board. He's been very solidly pro-life throughout his entire career.
I was a little disappointed how he walked back the issue where they were trying to protect the rights of Christians against lawsuits regarding gay marriages. I felt he fudged a little bit on that.
Yes, the Restoration Act for Religious Freedom. Yes, and that's an act
which was not unreasonable at all. They said, look, people have rights, but you have a right to your religious beliefs too.
Yes. So basically, I did do a little research on that, and that is some 20-plus states have that law in effect, and the states have modeled their law after a 1993 law signed into law by Bill Clinton. And however, in 1997, there was a court case which showed that if states wanted to get the full benefit of the federal law, that they needed to pass their own version of it. So some 20 plus states have passed this, including Connecticut, which actually had a more strict version of the law than Indiana. And that's the same state where the governor threatened to no longer do business with Indiana.
So the other states still have their laws, and
they
Indiana
have them in effect, but they
off.
weren't. But in the time since they passed their laws, many of them passed them in the early 2000s. The political landscape has changed dramatically.
Well, it's so frustrating because when the militant gay activists were trying to force the issue with gay marriages, their big deal was separation between church and state. This isn't going to affect the church. You can still do what you want. So now all of a sudden a Christian baker is told he has to bake a cake for a gay wedding. A Christian photographer is told he has to photograph a gay wedding. And what's the response? Oh, well, that doesn't violate church and state because you guys aren't employees of the church. I said, I'm sorry. Separation doesn't mean that the state defines what is the church. The New Testament defines the church as the body of Christ. A church is not a building that exists on a Sunday. The church is the people. And that what that law protects is our right to have our own freedom of religion. So it's very hypocritical that this is going on. I wish Pence had taken a stronger stand.
Now, here's the thing: it's a little more complex than that. In all the times these laws have been on the books, there's not an example of somebody successfully using these laws to really defend themselves. They just haven't. It's been very hard, and one of the reasons is that the way it's been applied, and this gets beyond. I'm not a legal analyst or anything like that, but apparently you can have a strict interpretation, a strict test, or a stringent test, or strict stringent test, and a more loose test. And typically, the courts and the judges have been applying a loose test of religious freedom to the use of this law. And so what it was, the law was meant to basically set a balance.
They always piggyback it on the civil rights bills of the 60s. It was a result. The original law came out as a result of the Hopi Indians, I believe, wanted to be able to use peyote as part of their religious ceremony. And they were ruled against, and this law was put into effect to protect their right to do that. Right.
So,
but then they'll come along now and say, well, that's in tension with civil rights, and they'll make it sound like the baker is refusing to, like he has a sign up saying, if you're gay, I won't sell you a cake, which is not what he was doing. But they were asking him to artistically make a certain kind of cake that violated his religious convictions. That's not the same as saying, I refuse to sell to you because you happen to be gay.
However, the Restoration of Freedom Acts that have been put out, the federal and the state versions, most likely would not even protect the wedding cake guy or the flower person. They would still not win even under those provisions. They've just not been able to win under the provisions because the judges have been applying a very loose test for religious freedom in the verdict.
We need to have another constitutional convention which goes back and reassesses what the courts are and are not supposed to do.
So what I guess I could say, it was, from a practical perspective, it wasn't these religious freedom acts that have been passed just have not had a big impact on religious freedom.
Okay.
But they've been symbolic, and the way that it was modified is that it was modified in such a way when he finally signed it that it did gut any chance of it being used to really protect religious freedom. So pragmatically not big, but it was symbolic, and he did back down. So it was not good.
We'll be right back. I promise you we won't be talking about Donald Trump every week, and we haven't been. We've had a couple, 2-3 weeks in a row where we didn't even talk about him, but these last couple of weeks, and today especially on the heels of the election, it is kind of a big elephant in the room. Here to examine that Republican elephant with me, Mike Fredenburg.
Okay, Bob. So just finishing up on the Restoration of Religious Freedom Act that had been passed throughout the country, I think probably the thinking was in Indiana, in the state legislature, is they had lots of large businesses just saying, we're pulling out operations. We were planning on building new plants and facilities. We're pulling them out. They had states saying, we're not going to hold conventions here in Indiana. They had tremendous economic pressure. And so what they probably thought is, pragmatically, this really hasn't done all that much. It was more symbolic because it really hasn't done that much. And that's probably how they rationalize. Now, that's my thinking. Nobody's actually said that.
And that's understandable. It is. It would have still been nice to see them have more of a spine. And when people stand up and rise up, when businesses do these threats, I mean, look what happened with Chick-fil-A. We literally had mayors saying you are not welcome in our city, and there was this public outcry. Chick-fil-A is doing better than ever now. So I think they could have had more of a spine. And even if it would have worked, we want to see a little more courage. So that's one of my problems with Pence. I do agree that Trump needed to pick a real diehard conservative. he passes that test, but there's just been so much compromise from conservatives over the years.
It is disappointing on that whole area.
It is very disappointing.
I just said I'm giving you what I believe the rationalization was. I don't agree with it. I think if you could weather the storm, something could have been accomplished. But we don't know, and I can't say him. We don't know what kind of support he had too, because he may have been losing party support, from his own people. There could have been a rebellion on hand. Obviously.
Well, but again, people are looking at Ted Cruz saying, are you going to put your country before your political career? One could have asked Pence that same question back then. Are you going to put what's right? He said at the convention, I'm a Christian and a conservative and a Republican in that order. Well, that decision made it sound like he was a Republican first and a Christian second.
It did, except that it's one of those things that he probably thought, is this the hill I want to die on? Yeah. Because it really doesn't accomplish what people think is accomplished.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. But
anyway, I will still vote for Trump. Because what's the alternative?
But we have that one thing that seems very glaring. But he has had a long history of being both a fiscal and social conservative, and seems to be a generally good person. A great family. His son is a Marine Corps officer studying to be an aviator. I believe by far and away, he was the best choice of the candidates we're looking at.
Given the alternative, there's nothing to even think about.
Yeah, well, but that puts him in a much better position. I mean, Newt Gingrich brought some baggage. Newt Gingrich has great positives, but he does have some negatives. The one negative you can point to Mike Pence on is this whole issue we've been talking about. Other than that, solid family, family man.
What would go a long way is if he says, I've had some chance to think about that and I regret that decision. I think it goes a long way when a politician apologizes, but I could probably count on half of a hand how many times that's ever really happened.
Trump did tell him to follow his example in that way, so I think we're waiting for him, to hear Pence, following Trump's example to admit that he was wrong.
Yeah. Trump's so good at admitting he was wrong. The most humbling thing that Trump said, though, was when he got up and spoke about the evangelicals, and he said, they've been great to me, and I'm not sure I deserve it. That's the closest thing to humility I've ever seen from Trump.
I see. Now, here's something that I think, too, about Trump is, he said some vulgar, reprehensible things on the Howard Stern show and some other venues back in the 1990s. And those were,
those blend into the Howard Stern show. So.
Yeah, but that was part of the Howard Stern show. I do believe that from that time to now that people could change. You have grandkids, you look at the country, you look back, I was trying to be a playboy, I was kind of being an idiot. Now, Trump can internally think those things.
Well, it's better than Hillary, who nobody knows what Hillary really believes about anything. All she does is put her finger to the wind or has a focus group or has handlers advising her.
I would say that that's a little bit, I'm not going to say unfair, but inaccurate. Since she has been in public life, she's been a pretty left-wing person. The idea that she's this moderate I believe, is somewhat...
Well, but like when she was running against Bernie, he was pushing her more and more to the left. It seems like her VP pick was to go back a little more to the center. Right. I think there's a real disingenuousness. I believe if somebody sat her down and said, you'll win more as a moderate than a liberal, that she'd become a moderate.
She will run more moderately to get wins.
She tends to really like Saul Alinsky. And by the way, I did not think that was an unfair speech that Ben Carson gave.
Let's put it this way. I think that she's dishonest enough to talk and run as a moderate Democrat. Remember, and a moderate Democrat doesn't mean the same thing it used to mean 20 years ago.
Oh, a moderate today is what a flaming liberal would have been 10 years ago.
So to run as a moderate Democrat, knowing full well that she intends to go to the left when she gets into the White House. And I believe that that's the case. I do not believe that she's a moderate Democrat. I believe that she's far closer to, say, Bernie Sanders than she is to her husband.
And we've got to keep this perspective. As the left moves more and more to the left, the only way a moderate, and the conservatives tend to stay where they are, the only way a moderate can stand in between them is to keep moving left themselves. And so people that today are moderates are really liberals who just like to call themselves moderates.
Exactly. So she's a very liberal left. She's not even a liberal. She's a left winger. She's been a left winger her entire life. She's probably closer to Bernie in real life than we think.
And as I said, I think Ben Carson got some bad rap for that speech he gave. He was pointing out her allegiance to Saul Alinsky, which probably was close to a genuine conviction that she at least had in college when she made a choice and chose to to do her thesis on Saul Alinsky. And Saul Alinsky did dedicate his book to Lucifer.
The original rebel, right?
The original rebel, yeah.
Yes.
And so Ben Carson points that out, and then the big headlines are, Ben Carson compares Hillary to Lucifer. Well, even if he had compared her to Lucifer, I'm not sure that would be all that inaccurate, but that's not what he was doing anyway. He was merely pointing out something that was in the front page of a book that she espoused.
So you probably spent a lot of time looking at the polls. And the polls,
I haven't seen the polls since the election.
Well,
has anything come out?
The polls are shifting toward Trump right now, pretty substantially.
How many points ahead is he now?
Well, okay.
What polls have you looked at?
Well, it depends which polls you're looking at, but Gravis shows him up, I think, by 1 or 2 points. The LA Times.
They were almost dead even before the convention.
LA Times, USC shows him up by 3 points. Other polls, the Real Clear Politics, the average still shows Hillary up by 1.9 points. But it's been shifting the wrong direction for Hillary Clinton.
Ever since the FBI gave this list of indictments and then said, however, there's not enough evidence to put her away, I don't think that helped her in the polls too much.
With that said, I believe that Trump will set a record for poll inaccuracy.
Okay, yeah, because there's a lot of people that aren't going to want to admit that they're going to vote for
He is persona non grata in so many segments of society. Not only from the left, but from the libertarian right, the fringe right on there.
Okay, we'll be right back. Okay, Mike, we're down to our last segment. I want to give you a chance to talk about what you thought were some of the highlights of the convention last week. Any more projections you have to make?
Well, I do agree with you that two of the most impressive speeches were Rudy Giuliani's and Laura Ingram's. I mean, they were very, very good. Excellent. I would say, though, my favorite speech was that of Donald Trump's speech.
He really did hit it out of the park.
No, he hit it out of the park, and he was coming from where I'm coming from on all the major issues. His support for the men in blue and the men and women in blue, whose job is to protect us, and just how important that is to our society and our country. Trying to restore some balance on trade deals so it's a win-win for everybody.
Speaking of the men in blue, did you know they're going to have the mother of the victim? Well, I won't even call him a victim. The thug that got shot in Ferguson.
Yes.
The police officer was exonerated, was even exonerated by Obama's Justice Department, which was looking for blood. Even they had to admit the guy was innocent. The whole Black Lives Matter movement started because of this falsehood. And they're bringing on the mother of this kid at the Democratic convention. The word shameful doesn't even come close to how that makes me feel.
Well, apparently the mother of Mike Brown, the young man that was killed, and he was obviously on a bad track. He had just roughed up a very small Vietnamese man in a convenience store, went for the officer's gun, and unfortunately, he was shot.
Well, and of course, any crying mother, of course she misses her son. Of course, we're going to feel bad for her. But what is the point of putting her on there?
Well, but here's where I just think that they really are out of touch. Right now, Black Lives Matter. The polling for Black Lives Matter in terms of its favorability are going down, and I believe they're going to continue to go down. So Hillary's sort of stuck with that. She's stuck with this sinking ship, Black Lives Matter, which people are going to be beginning to realize that it's not a civil rights group, that it does not honor the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. It's a group of radical leftists that any chance they can get away with violence, they get it. They execute violence. And people are going to start to understand this. So Hillary's got this anchor of Black Lives Matters around her neck. And now she's doubling down on this with Leslie McSpadden, who is the mother of Mike Brown. So they're going to have her speaking there. And the country, she's going the opposite direction of where the country's going.
To what end? Are we supposed to suddenly imagine now that Mike Brown was innocent? And they were claiming that he had lifted up his hands and said, don't shoot. None of that happened, ladies and gentlemen. It's a downright lie.
But they're stuck in their narrative. And they so desperately need...
Well, let them implode again. This is Trump's to lose.
But what's so sad, though, is that there is this sort of a two Americas where people that are, African Americans, people of color, see things through a completely different prism. You hear them being interviewed, and I genuinely believe that they believe what they're saying.
They do.
And they do. And
my gosh. I was at a Christian healing conference a number of years ago, and I met an African-American college student. He was literally, honestly afraid that he was going to be made a slave again someday.
Yeah. So that's their reality, and Hillary Clinton has been fanning and feeding that reality. So she can't walk away from that, because she'll split her vote out, and she desperately needs that vote.
Then they talk about how negative Trump and the Republicans were, and they're going to do something like this.
Bob, we know the Democrat Party has been the party that pushes racism.
They drive a train through it, and then Hillary gives a speech about how Donald Trump is too angry.
Yep,
he's too angry. I hear anger in her every time she opens her mouth.
No, it's the Democrat Party, it's the liberals, it's the leftists that break everything down by race, gender, people groups. They basically, their modus operandi is to balkanize our country into splinter groups and tell all the groups that they can have what they want from them.
Now, what do you say to those people who claim that Trump didn't offer any details or any solutions? They must not have been watching the same convention I was. I heard him offer all kinds of things.
Well, Bob, if we simply start enforcing the laws on the book and have somebody that has the will, that's a lot of detail. There's a lot there. What if we start saying, hey, you've got to follow the law of the land, get rid of the sanctuary cities. The Border Patrol is now going to be given, the go-ahead to start doing its job like it's supposed to. The local law enforcement, which is supposed to cooperate with them, will be told.
Well, and even the people that say it's impossible to build this law, I'm going, excuse me, what? Here's a guy that built Trump Tower. You don't think he can build a wall? He says Mexico's going to pay for it. Why is that so fantastic? All he has to do is tell Mexico, we're dropping all your foreign aid if you don't pay for this wall.
Listen,
that would be the end of it right there.
There's ways that effectively can be argued that they're paying for it, and how it's going to be worked out, who knows?
And I'm not even one who says we absolutely need the wall, but he promised that wall. He darn well. He better build the wall.
He should build the wall.
He built his campaign on the wall. He's got to build the blasted wall.
And as long as he can point to that, some rationale as to why Mexico's paying for it, I'll be happy with it. Even if it's, if it's a little thin, I don't care. At this point, I do want the wall built.
He could set up a whole series of drive-in movie theater screens and make that the wall. I don't care, but he better do something.
But far more important, and I believe that Trump will do this, will be employer sanctions, for people that hire people illegally.
Yeah, I think the E-Verify is the easiest thing to do.
E-Verify. Basically, taking a look, what can we do to cut off benefits to people here illegally? All those things that are magnets to bring people to this country need to be, shut down as much as possible. And if we do that, and by doing that, we're showing compassion. It is compassion. We need the lower socioeconomic sectors of society are heavily impacted by cheap, illegal immigrant labor, willing to do jobs and undercut their wages. They're also being hurt by, the visas given out to skilled labor, that's hurting our upper class. And then we have these trade agreements, which, are not necessarily getting us stuff cheaper, because in many cases, the products are being subsidized by China. They could actually be built here cheaper. And once China gains the market, they go ahead and raise the prices back up again anyway. So there's so many things that Trump has said that he's right about. And he's not right about everything, but a lot of the issues that he's talking about have been festering, and nobody's been paying attention to him, and that's why he's popular, because he is addressing issues that people are concerned about.
Now, I wanted to ask you, we both have a lot of conservative friends who are never Trumpers. Did you see any of them turn around after the convention this week?
I haven't had an opportunity to get any feedback on that. Frankly, for some of my friends who are never Trumpers, they will not. They're so entrenched in that position. All they will spend their time doing is reading things that trash Trump. So all they're interested in doing is reinforcing their negative view of Trump.
Well, that's too bad, because conservatives are always talking about how they're more open-minded and they look at both sides.
Some of them are that way. Now, some of them aren't. I mean, some of them, listen, I'm hoping that at some point they will, and a lot of my friends are also, have a very libertarian edge to their conservatism. And Trump is
this thing on trade.
Yeah, and Trump says some stuff that does make people wince. We're going to penalize the companies that move out of here. There's no way they're going to do that. We're going to penalize them, and it sounds pretty harsh. But there's
all he's got to do is lower their taxes, and they would come back anyway.
Lowering the taxes will help somewhat, removing the regulations will help somewhat. But some of it is also going to have to be that if countries, we may have to have some tariffs. And if we have to have some tariffs to protect our jobs, then we have to do it.
Okay. Are you going to watch the Democratic convention? I don't think I could sit through it. I believe in hearing both sides, but I already know every word that's going to come out of their mouth. I don't know if I can handle it.
I will selectively watch some of it.
I'll watch the Bernie Sanders protesters and see if they implode.
I'll watch some of it just so I can watch it and hear what they're saying. But I have to admit, I'm not really that open-minded about left-wing ideas.
Okay, Mike, always good having you. We'll have you on again another month or so and do a progress report.
And thanks for having me on, Bob.
Okay, bye-bye.